I'm Marci Burdick, South Dakota Hall of Fame board member, and we're here today with 2024 inductee Greg Sands of Sioux Falls. Greg, congratulations first.
Thank you very much. I'm very honored.
Good. Well, you deserved this honor in reading about you, and that's a little bit of what I'd like to capture today. And I'd like to start with the fact that your life was not an easy one. You're not a silver spooner.
No, it was a tough life. I was raised by a single parent, and she, worked 2 or 3 jobs to keep food on our table, and we always had food and clean clothes, but there wasn't excess. And the painful childhood that led to addiction that ultimately led to incarceration. And once I became incarcerated, it was somebody else's fault. I was there. I was a victim. It was just, everything is always somebody else's fault. I had a moment of clarity about 12 months in that I was an adult involved in a criminal conspiracy, and that's why I was incarcerated.
Okay, so you're in prison, you're 35, young guy, world ahead of you, you're looking at prison walls. It's everybody else's fault. So talk about that moment of clarity. What happened?
Well, I just was finally able, through God's grace, to have this moment of self-awareness that my life was messed up because of me, and my life would get straightened out because of me. And so at that point, I started planning. There's a way that you can get off probation early. There's a way in a process that you can get a presidential pardon. And I started planning for those things before I left. And when I walked out the door, I wasn't trusted by my probation officers, and they had no reason to trust me. But once I proved myself to them, they became my allies. And I was on probation 5 years. I got off in 2.5, which is the fastest that you can ever get off of it. Mm-hmm. And then once the day I got off of it, the next day I filed for the presidential pardon. And so all of those things I planned when I was still incarcerated.
Mm-hmm. But I read about you when you came out of prison. You had $1,000 that you'd earned working 25 cents an hour in prison.
Yeah.
The Bureau of Prisons gave you $50.
Yeah.
And your grandmother gave you a loan.
Yeah.
What were you going to do with it? What was your game plan?
Well, the game plan was to buy a $1,500 car and buy $300 or $400 worth of tools, taping tools, because I was a drywall finisher by trade, and then $300 or $400 in clothes, and have $300 or $400 in cash. And I went and bought all that stuff. And by that time, my life was really, I started fast when I got out. I was working and going to meetings and working, and that was it. And once the people that are in the system, the halfway house, the probation officers, once they see you're doing what you should be doing, they just let you run. And, I could work as much as I wanted. And so I was able to kind of start getting ahead. I paid my grandma back the $2,500 before she passed, and I've never borrowed a penny from anyone else again in my life ever. And I'm really proud of that.
Yeah.
That was the first time in my life that I became self-sufficient. And when you become self-sufficient, it is just empowering. If you haven't been self-sufficient because your brother, mother, cousin, uncle, or someone else has been helping you all the time, once you actually make it happen yourself, it's like a rocket. For me, it was.
Mm-hmm. And along the way, you met the woman who'd become your wife.
Yep.
And she became your partner in life and work.
Yeah, I met Pam. We met at AA, because she had a drinking problem. Oh, I can't say. She's going to kill me for that. We always joke about that. We both had issues, and we met there.
I was going to say, and she tells the story, I met Greg because he had a drinking problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we started dating. We dated for 3 years and got married. And we've been, February, it'll be 30 years. And, and she was my partner. we didn't have anything. We worked like dogs. She was working, cutting hair 70 hours a week, and I was drywalling 70 hours a week, and we started doing better, and having that partner all of this time by my side to pick up the slack when I couldn't, and all, it's been both of us. The only reason I'm at this table is because of her too.
I've yet to talk to anybody in this state, and I have, as I've shared with you, addiction issues in my own family. I have yet to speak to anyone ever who, when you start telling that story, doesn't say, "Oh yeah, me too." But you were able to overcome, and a lot of people aren't. It's total failure, or failure after failure, or failure after failure. When you talk to people who are in the same circumstance as you as a 35-year-old, what do you talk to them about? What do you say to them about overcoming adversity and opportunity that might exist for them?
The first thing I tell them is when you were in active addiction, you created all this wreckage. And so now you have all these hurdles to jump, to fix. You got to fix this. And there's a lot of hurdles. So only focus on the hurdle that is in front of you. Don't focus on 50 hurdles, because you can't jump 50. You can jump one. Just jump one at a time. Get over one hurdle at a time, one challenge at a time. Stay focused, work hard, be honest. And then eventually there's no more hurdles. And that's what I did. I had a federal tax lien against me that was paralyzing. You can't have a bank account. They can take your checks, and I had to get this worked out. But when you start making the right choices in your life, then God steps in, and he just blew the doors open on a lot of scenarios for me. One example is my tax situation. When I became incarcerated, I owed $4,000. When I got out, I owed $10,000. Interest and penalties with the IRS. And so I go to make an offer and compromise at $4,200, and I walk into the IRS office, tell them who I am, what I want to do, and they send this guy down to talk to me. And I mean, the guy really had the presence of God. I mean, he sounded like you were talking to God, just extremely intimidating man. And I was nervous because I didn't, my life was, I was just trying to get one foot put in front of the other. I was just trying to be able to rent an apartment and be able to buy a car and get a credit card and things that we take for granted. And he took 4 or 5 meetings with me. He said, he worked out the offer and compromise. He said, at the end of the year, Greg, you have $50 left. I said, who actually makes that decision? He says, it goes upstairs and they'll decide. And I said, well, but who actually decides that? He said, that would be me. I'm the director of the IRS. And it was just another sign to me that when I'm doing the right things for the right reasons in my life, good things happen. And I just kept doing the right thing over and over. And the snowball effect that the company had of treating employees the way you want to be treated just skyrocketed the company, because they weren't being treated as good wherever they were at before.
But a lot of the people you've hired have had similar paths themselves. Their story is similar to yours, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, and a lot have and a lot haven't. And we're going to give you an opportunity. And if you seize on that opportunity, it's going to be great for you. If you don't, then you'll get fired. And we're going to work with you and give you a chance. And, but at a certain point, I can't be so lenient with this guy that it's unfair to that guy. Right. And we have standards, and we're sans wall systems, and that means something. If they're hiring us to do this job, in many cases, we've been chosen for the job, and you can't show up and do a bad job. And so if this guy's doing a bad job and he won't listen, he's going to go down the road, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe 9 months from now, he comes back and says, I got my act together. We've had that happen 30 times, and it worked out good. You know, when they come back, they're very grateful.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
I want to talk to you. One of the things I've learned about being on this board is that South Dakotans are almost loath to talk about themselves and to talk about themselves in the context of impact and legacy. But I'm going to press you on that today because I think that's what's really important about what the Hall does. And we're all going to be dust someday, and these stories are important to capture. So I really want to encourage you to talk about them. And I want to talk about your impact and legacy really on two paths. And let me start with the business path. You were an innovator in the wall systems business. So you started as a taper. And I'd like you to take me through that journey a little bit about how you kind of innovated some of the business practices, some of the ideas that you had that really helped fuel the company's growth, and then talk a little bit about how the business is configured today, if you would, or whatever you'd like to say about your impact as it relates to your business.
Sure. So I'm a drywall finisher by trade, and that's the guy that makes the sheetrock smooth. Mm-hmm. And when I started in Sioux Falls, there was some drywall outfits, and they would have 2 tapers. And so I hired 10, 15 tapers, and I had these power crews, and we would go around and do hospital wings or big commercial projects for other drywall contractors. And then we did the Washington Pavilion, and at the pavilion, I hired about 100 people and walked out the door with 20 good guys. And that was a 15-month job. And on my way out of that project, I started doing hanging and taping, because that's what the scope is. If you're going to bid a commercial job, you have to do both. And so then we were doing hanging and taping on wood for about 10 years. And the what I did different than anyone else there was build those power crews of tapers so that a guy could get a wing of a hospital done in a week instead of a month. And then I was working for a guy by the name Al Stone doing a job for Craig Lloyd. And he was unhappy with my framer, steel stud framer. I was subbing out the framing then. And he said, I don't ever want that guy back on my job. And then he had another job coming. And I said, Al, if I have those guys coming, we just leave that one guy off. And he said, Greg, what part of never didn't you understand? And I said, I understood it perfectly. And then that's when I started my steel stud framing division. So that is 10 or 11 years in. Now we're a full service drywaller, hanging, taping, insulation, steel stud framing. And then 15 years in, we opened in Rapid City. 17 years in, we open in North Dakota. 25 years in, we start the prefabrication division. 28 years in, we start manufacturing our own steel studs. And then 29 years in, we do 100% employee-owned ESOP. So that's kind of the quick version of the company. And when we did the ESOP, we were the 33rd largest drywall stud company in America.
Wow.
You know, and that's on top line revenue is how they monitor that.
You know, a lot of businesses say they have a value of treating their employees right and that they do it. What does that mean to you? What does that look like when you say that? What's different about Sands Wall Systems?
Well, what's different, if you work for me and your dad's dying down in Houston, I'm going to put you on a plane and fly you there and keep sending you checks until you come back. You know, and there's no time frame. That's just the right thing to do. And what has happened is when stuff like that happens and that guy goes back to work and his coworkers are there and they're like, wow, you know, that's so awesome. And we just take care of our people and we have great people. You know, to do an ESOP is very challenging. There's a reason there's only 7,000 of them in America. If you think of how many companies are in America, and then we're 100% ESOP, there's only 3,500 of them. You know, so we're a very rare thing, but a lot of stuff has to line up to do that. You have to be a very stable company, well operated, a lot of blue sky, great leadership, no major change in leadership throughout, so when I did the ESOP, one of the greatest things I said to my employees was, I was your boss yesterday and I'll be your boss tomorrow. There's nothing changing. Ryan and Jared were your bosses yesterday, they'll be your boss tomorrow. And so that made that transition a little better for us, because I guess people quit sometimes when they hear about an ESOP because they're just confused. Right. And so we had good communication, and our employees have loved it. And I met with my ESOP attorney Wednesday this week, and he said we are the shining example of how to do it properly. I'm proud of that.
That is terrific. I have been on the board of a company that was an ESOP, and I'm nodding at everything you say about the complexity and the misunderstanding. Yeah. Well, good for you.
Thank you.
Let me take you down another path, and that is kind of the philanthropic work that you do. And I was really intrigued by the piece of your story that talked about being involved with Glory House, a halfway house for people who don't know it, and helping setting you on a path. And then the work that you and Pam have done with the recovery community in Sioux Falls. Would you talk a little bit about those things that you think really kind of underscore the impact that you have to that issue and those issues of philanthropic investment?
Yeah. So the Glory House, I was in the Glory House when I was going to prison, pre-sentence investigation. Mm-hmm. They put me in there because I was drinking. And then when I was coming out, this is two years later or whatever it was, I wanted to go back to the Glory House because when you leave the BOP, the Bureau of Prisons, your last X amount of months that you leave the BOP and go into a halfway house, you're still in custody of the BOP. Mm-hmm. So they still have a leash there. And I chose the Glory House, and it was just one of the greatest things I ever did. And I had planned on drinking my first day when I got out of prison. And I took the shuttle from the prison to the airport, walked straight to the bar, and ordered a Diet Coke. And, that was divine intervention that day, because I had been thinking about that drink for months and months and months. And I knew I could have a couple drinks in the morning, and by the time I got to the Glory House, I would blow clean. But God intervened that day, and I got to the Glory House, and I took off. And then when I got out of the Glory House, they asked me to be on the board of directors. And so I got on the board, and I was very proud to be the first former board member, our first former resident to be on the board. And then they asked me to be the president. And I said, no, I just didn't have faith in myself that I could do it. So then they asked me again. And a friend of mine, brilliant guy named Jeff Strand, was the board ahead of me. And he's just very sharp. And so I thought, this is the best time for me to be the president, because he's got everything in order. And I take over. 2 weeks later, the director walks into my office and resigns. So now it is my responsibility to run the Glory House. As president of the board, that's the gig. And I had a job. So I called Dave Johnson on Wednesday. He comes to my office. I tell him. And we have an emergency board meeting on Saturday, and I hire him back. And an interesting thing in that story, Marci, is when Dave came out to see me to my office, because I had never called him and said, Dave, I'm in trouble. I need help. Come out. And that's what I did that day. So we get through talking. He goes, Greg, I'm so glad this is what you called me about. I said, well, what did you think I called you about? He said, well, I thought you relapsed. And that was just such a humbling thing for me, and I have to remain humble. And so as we started having the ability to help organizations, the Glory House, I have a sweet spot for, of course, because of me being there. And then we were able to get some synergy with Lloyd and the Glory House and MacArthur Foundation, and we got those 75 units open. We built the Sands Freedom Center there in '07, which was a halfway house for women. And there hadn't been a halfway house in Sioux Falls, I believe, in about 15 years at that point, and I don't believe that there had ever been one for women. And at that point, we were incarcerating women at an extremely high rate, and mostly meth. And so we got those buildings up for Glory House, and God, what happened was I had about 15 years clean, and it was hard for me to go to normal meetings anymore because of who I was and my success in my company, and somebody wanted something besides recovery from me. They wanted a truck, a loan, a job, hire my sister. And so then I started doing stuff for Governor Rounds on the task force. And then Dugard, he put me to work like nonstop for 8 years. And then the philanthropy, we became involved in philanthropy because of what our peers were doing. I watched companies like mine that were leaders in the industry and what they were doing. And they were all giving back. And it felt right. And the first time I made significant money, but my CPA came down from Aberdeen, and we were just on fire. The company was on fire. I had 3 massive jobs going at one time. Okay, this is 28 years ago. Today, that would keep us busy until 10 o'clock in the morning. But back then, it was overwhelming. And my CPA said to me, Greg, last March, you made this much money in 1 month. This has to be wrong. And I said, no, that's accurate. I was doing 3 jobs simultaneously then. And I drove down to the store, to the convenience store to buy a pack of cigarettes. Of course, I'm smoking. I quit them too. And on my way back from the store, my first thought when I left the parking lot wasn't, should I go buy a Corvette? It was, who can I help with this money? And I am so grateful that that's how my mind thought about it, is who can I help with this? So that's kind of the philanthropy thing. And then Pam is doing a lot of stuff now that she's going to get going on that we're really excited about, that now that I'm kind of out of the office.
You are so fortunate that you've worked so hard to do so well and be able to be a philanthropist. But I know a lot of philanthropists that just write checks. You do the real work yourself too.
I do, if it's in my wheelhouse, and I'm good at it, and I like starting with nothing and ending with something great and something that's sustainable. So I have to look for things where I can partner with someone like an Avera, and a Glory House, or Sanford, or SDSU, something where they're going to help make this endeavor sustainable, because they have systems in place, and we're just tacking this on, right? And I learned this very early, Marci. Like when I did the Sands Freedom Center in '07, really hard to get money for that. And Dana Dykehouse helped me out with it, teaching me how to raise money. I didn't know how, and I still don't go ask people for money, because that's not what I do. And but in '07, that first one that I did, that was really, really hard. And now it's gotten a little easier because I know more people. And also, look at how our system has changed in 20 years, Marci. Now, I've got one question for you, Marci. Do you think 20 years ago I would be sitting here today?
Well, given that at 20 and 25 years you were already doing wonderful things, yes. But sadly, I guess I know too many people whose lives parallel yours? And the answer would be no. They would not be sitting here today. They would be a statistic.
Yeah.
So what do you think the difference was?
Well, the reason that I can get this podium now is because we have educated within our state. Mm-hmm. We have educated about the disease. It's a disease. It's a disease. It's not a moral deficiency. It's a disease. And we have plenty of moral deficiencies that we can talk about of mine if we want, but that's just not one of them. And I have a disease. It's deadly. It's fatal, and it lasts forever. It's never mm-hmm. going away from me. I'm an addict every day. Mm-hmm. And 20 years ago, when I started going around town, talking to people and trying to get into institutions to speak, it was impossible. For me to get into the state penitentiary and speak was a 2 or 3 year process that would never have happened if there wasn't this special counselor that I never talked to him in person. I don't think ever, but on the phone, he was just getting all my data, and I was just sending him everything I could. He had a big file on me, and he kept taking it to the wardens. And then eventually, after 2 or 3 years, they let me in, and I started a Narcotics Anonymous meeting in the prison up on the hill. And then I started getting security clearances easier. And then once I got the presidential pardon, the floodgates opened for that,
Mm-hmm. I was going to save that till the very end, but now that since you touched on it, you did get it. That was a nice end to that story. But how long did it take?
That took to get the pardon?
Yeah,
took 10 years. I filed. So the first time I filed, it probably took eight years, because we filed the paperwork, and then they said the paperwork you sent in is obsolete. And I said, well, you gave it to me. Yeah, we know it's still obsolete though. So my probation officers helped me fill it out again. And because it's critical that any offense that you have when you're applying for a pardon, if your paperwork is wrong, it's in the trash can. They're not calling you up and saying, hey, Greg, did you make a mistake here? And so the fact that the probation helped me with that. And that's what probation does, is they help people who are helping themselves. And that's the misconception that inmates have coming out of prison, mm-hmm. is that their probation officers are against them. They're not against you. They want to help you. They don't want you to go back. They want you to get your act together, mm-hmm. get a job, start taking care of your responsibilities, start paying some taxes, and just move on. They don't want to stop you. They don't want to put you back in prison. They want you to work. Mm-hmm. And I ran into my probation officer at a coffee shop and said, Terrell, what's the status of my pardon? I'll call and find out. She calls me back and says, Greg, it's not at the Board of Pardons, so that means that they must have sent it back to Colorado, which means you've been denied. We'll file with the next administration. And I said, okay. And so I just completely let it go for the first time in 8 years. And 6 weeks later, we get a phone call out at the office. It's just Pam and I. And she comes back from the reception desk into my office and said, Greg, it's Associated Press for you. I think you might have gotten a pardon. And I pick up the phone and they said, is this the Greg Sands that just got the presidential pardon? And I said, I think it is. So that was, 8:30 in the morning. We're so excited. Well, and then came the fear about, half my customers don't know about my past. So the big customers that I had big jobs with, half of them knew. And then the other half I called and said, tonight on the media, you're going to see this story. And what happened because of that was about 80 letters got written to me by people congratulating me and saying, would you help my son, mother, brother, daughter, cousin? And so then that night, Pam and I are driving around. We're having a great time. And I'm driving. And I say to her, so this side of the car is for those of us that got a presidential pardon today. And she said, and this side of the car is for those of us who didn't need one. So it was a wonderful day. And it did really change my life because it gave me a security clearance into the federal system, and I went back to the prison I was in and spoke, and the guy said, so I heard you're the BOP's success story. And I said, the BOP had nothing to do with my success. My success is through God's grace, the miracle of recovery, and my own hard work. And I spoke. It was the first time I spoke about money in that environment, because so many men are in there because of greed. Mm-hmm. So I spoke about the fact that you can make money without doing that. Mm-hmm. I'm making money, and I'm not doing that. And then when I walked out, Pam was waiting for me, and she said that I was glowing when I walked out. And it was a surreal experience, and it was just a great experience in my life.
What's the reaction of that crowd? It sounds like they started out with a little cynicism there, if you're the BOP poster child.
Well, that was the wardens. The inmates were in awe of a guy that, left 10 years ago and is back now, and successful and clean and sober, and is living in an RV and has a security clearance to get in and out of here. That's very rare. So there was a lot of accolades, and it was took positively, and I've spoken to some tough crowds. That wasn't I've spoken to much worse crowds than that.
Well, when we've done a lot of looking back, I'd like to look forward a little bit. So when you look out and you look at that horizon and the vision for your future, your company's future, your family's future, your community's future, what do you see? Your state's future, what do you see?
Well, I see a need for more people to do more stuff. And I think that, I'm one of those people that needs to do more, and I will. And I have some friends that they don't need to do anything, but they will. And I want to do something for the state of South Dakota. And it's hard to get your arms around it. And now I'm on the South Dakota Community Foundation, as you know, because of course she's my fellow board member. And she's been there longer than me. And I want to do something that's going to last forever. It has to be something that is sustainable, and it has to be, for me, Marci, it has to deal with addiction and mental health and feeding people. Those are the three things that are in Greg and Pam's wheelhouse.
Well, I want to ask you one last question. When I read about you, when I talk to you, I'm always inspired by how you really live your values. What are the personal values that you say did guide you and certainly now guide you then?
So the reality was, even when I was in the wrath of addiction, I tried to be a good man, and tried not to hurt people, or, I was hurting, of course, like you hurt, when you're in addiction, you hurt the people you love, because, that's what addiction does. And, but my moral fiber wasn't as bad as other people I seen and other people I was incarcerated with. One thing I learned when I was incarcerated is that there's people that do belong in there for the rest of their life. And I have friends that would disagree with that, but they didn't have to sleep down the hall from the guy. And my moral compass was headed in the right direction. It was wavering because of the addiction, and then once the addiction overtakes your life and you become powerless over your addiction, then your addiction is in control. The moral compass is gone. The addiction is in control. And so when I refound my compass by getting clean, I was doing the right things for the right reasons, and my life was changing rapidly. And then what happened was I became successful, and the whole world switches from me wanting something somewhere to the whole world wanting something from me. And I landed on addiction, mental health, and food. I love feeding people. I love Matt Gasson out there at Feeding South Dakota. He used to work out there, and that's a great organization, and we still help them like we always have, and we always will. And our employees are starting to get into it more. And I love the fact that now when they see Sands Wall System supporting Feeding South Dakota, and we're feeding 5,000 families, they know that they helped do that. You know, and the guy called me up and said, I saw our name on something the other day, Greg, and I was just so proud. You know, so that feeling of that joy of giving and being a cheerful giver is very important.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Marci.